This is Father Gregory Pine.
This is Father Joseph Anthony Kress.
And welcome to Godsplaining. Thanks to all those who support us. If you enjoy the podcast, please consider making a monthly donation on Patreon. Be sure to like and subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. I feel like I miffed that, but alas and alack, if you say the word podcast 3 times inside of 7 seconds, people begin to notice, especially yourself. Irrespective of the bad entry, though, we're delighted for this episode of Guestsplaining to be joined by Luke Kornet. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you guys for having me.
Boom. All right. For those who follow NBA basketball and who care about the NBA championship as it was, played out in undramatic fashion in 2024. I don't know, did you lose any games in the postseason last year? Unclear. But Luke Kornet is a center for the Boston Celtics. But for those who don't know you, or for those who would like to hear more about you, would you just say a word of introduction?
Yeah, so I'm Luke Kornet. I'm in my 8th year playing professional basketball, the last basically 4 with the Celtics, and we won the championship last year. But I'm a lifelong Catholic, husband and father of 2 little girls, and I've been playing professional basketball now for quite a while. Went to Vanderbilt University, played all 4 years, but kind of had a career just making it year by year in the NBA.
Boom. Okay, maybe we start there, making it year by year in the NBA. So there are, 30 NBA teams, and they have 15 contracts and maybe a couple 2-way deals. So there are a lot of people in the world who play basketball, and not many of them get to play in the NBA. And certainly you've experienced the struggle of demonstrating your capabilities and then, finding a place on a team that's real good. So what is that like? What I don't know, insofar as you care to share or can share, something of the struggle and then something of the gratitude of finding a home with the Boston Celtics?
My career was always kind of on the fringe, honestly, in certain ways. I came in, I was not drafted. I spent all 4 years in college, which you're already kind of behind it a little bit, and started off in the G League and was able to kind of make my way playing professionally with the Knicks in New York, and then with Chicago. But then even through there, kind of had injuries where I sort of lost my primary ability, which for most of my life was shooting, shooting threes and stuff, which as a big guy was pretty rare. But I essentially lost that ability through injuries, and then was back out of the NBA into the G League, and then kind of through that I ended up getting traded to Boston, then was out and in the G League, and then came back into Boston, into kind of trying to refigure my way as a professional basketball player and changing my game, and now kind of finding my way to now being I was a very contributing member in the last 2 years for the Celtics as we were really contending for a championship. And there's a lot of definitely difficulty of having so much of yourself kind of invested in this thing and really failing, but then honestly that became a real path of honestly God reaching me and connecting me through my sufferings and failures in that area, and then ended up kind of delivering me to a place where I sort of was able to accomplish all more than I ever kind of dreamed of when I first came into the NBA, albeit through the most unlikely route I could have ever, and I wouldn't have wanted for myself, honestly. So it was really a gift, and has been a gift, even though I still struggle with wanting to have been the player I was before. But I think in terms of accepting a role and kind of accepting my place with a team and actually finding joy in that, and being able to really just contribute to the greater purpose of your team, and honestly connecting with guys on things apart from basketball, because I found my own identity so much away from that. That's been really, honestly, I've just been sort of witnessing it as God has kind of put it in my life, I feel like.
Yeah, Luke, as a college chaplain at UVA, I work a lot with our student athletes, and praise God, UVA has a top tier athletics program. We're dealing with some really, really fine athletes here. And one of the things I find a lot of our athletes struggle with, particularly when they hit adversities, and you talked a lot about the kind of adversities of your entire professional career, whether that's injuries or, kind of getting relegated to a different role on the team or things like that. But trying to work with our students and helping them to understand that their identity is not so much in their athletic prowess, or their identity is not in the sport or anything like that, but their identity is in their relationship with God, which then motivates them to strive for excellence on the field or elsewhere and whatever it may be. But can you talk a little bit about like that kind of struggle and the tension between seeing something that is such a huge part of you? It's a passion. You enjoy playing basketball and the success you have and having the goals of getting to the NBA and kind of fighting for that. But how does that affect kind of your understanding of who you are individually and what you can bring for that? How does the faith interact with your sport in that context?
Yeah, I feel like that is I was kind of in like the battle of my basketball playing life. And I feel like I was honestly fortunate in a lot of respects where I was a very late bloomer. And so I was like late to
Mm,
even possibly playing in college. And that was kind of like as
really?
after my senior years when I first got recruited. And so I like really didn't have that whole like feeling like a projection throughout my entire life. And even as I
Hmm.
got to college, I was like, all right, well, I'll have to do well in school and kind of find a job. And that just kind of slowly tilted the other way towards basketball as I went along. And I was kind of, more successful in it as I kept going. But it was amazing how even with that kind of a background and kind of perspective of myself, how like with the success and just being surrounded in the environment of it, how much I put my identity into it and like
Hmm.
felt
Hmm.
like, I mean, it was weird because I was a practicing Catholic the entire time and grew up in the church and all of that. But I think it really felt like I was finding ways to try to make like my ultimate goal is like aspiring to do well in basketball, and then like the faith kind of fit into that. And I feel like God kind of
Hmm.
honestly like forcefully pulled me out of that. But
Hmm.
I found myself honestly, I resonate a lot. There's the TV show The Chosen, and there's like the
Yeah.
whole Nathaniel character where he's kind of like everything I did for you, God, and yet like here I am, kind of like laying in the waste of it. Um, but it was only like as I realized what God was actually calling me into, which was literally at the time when I was coming out of the NBA and was back in the G League. I was kind of like, oh, I need to serve God first and like live the life I hope for,
Hmm.
like now and here. And it's only then that even like with success will I actually feel that way about it. There's kind of like a desire to put all your it's hard to not fall into as you're playing because you get so much positive reinforcement. But
Right.
like now I feel like I've kind of been laid back to being so rooted in like honestly prayer. Like Exodus 90 was a big part of my life and kind of conversion at that point. And you realize like any of this identity that I'm getting in my sport is ultimately like uh, fleeting, and it's a
Hmm.
matter of time essentially before it passes. And um, yeah, God's kind of playing your own, like writing your own story, and also only knows how to reach you in the ways that you can. I think, and kind of realizing that for myself, it really opened my eyes to honestly the suffering of everyone, even within the basketball world, and those kinds of
Mm.
things of having all these aspirations, knowing that like they're not going to be met within the game, But it's hard to be able to convince someone of that, and I don't really know exactly how to go about that.
Hmm. Yeah, maybe, yeah, just apropos of the last couple of answers, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, what you understand by success and failure. Because my suspicion is that there are various ways to approach success within basketball. Some guys might, if they know that they're on a bad team and that the chances of that team improving are low for however many years, they might just focus on their own individual stats and accolades, and they might define success more individually. Or, if you're very invested in the team project and you think you have genuine title hopes, then you're going to invest in the team project. And at the end of the year, there are 29 losers and one winner. But like your faith gives you a kind of vantage or perspective on success and failure both. So maybe, yeah, what do you make of success and failure, and kind of how do you define it at present, or how might you define it by comparison to former definitions?
Uh, yeah, I feel like currently, honestly, I think I still sort of struggle with it because so much of it feels like I don't even know what my success will kind of look like as it pertains to it. It's kind of like I'm trying to remain faithful and like God, I trust that you're sort of working it in a larger sense than even what I'm understanding. Because I think there's still so much rooting out of myself of like, it's like funny with even like in the last couple of years, I feel like I've devoted to myself to like, all right, I'm not going for personal ambitions. It's like whatever it takes for the team to do well. And then yet, even in winning the championship, like the best feeling of it, honestly, was like the playing that happens and the actual like connection of the moments when you're actually playing. And then afterwards, kind of just knowing like, oh, like well done, we did our job well. But
Mm-hmm.
like you kind of knew even in that moment that like this surely can't really be it, you know? But I think there's so much pressure to feel like that is like all that you should have hoped for and all that like you expect for. And so it's a weird thing when it comes like the success and failure because it really does feel like now it's like success is just like remaining faithful and remaining trusting that God is working good through it, like even in the times that you're really struggling and the times that like you're really enjoying. Uh, and that failure, honestly, is just kind of the times when you feel like you're losing who you are to the game a little bit. But um, yeah, it's like a weird place to get to. Like, it's so much more of like a place now where you realize, like, oh, you kind of just want to be challenged and to like face these deeper things within yourself is like a great part of competition.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I don't now. I feel like it's hard for me to take away the lens of yeah, essentially like the success that we're sort of striving for, like the winning of a championship and all those things. It's kind of more about like what we're learning about ourselves in the moments that we're experiencing while we're doing. This sounds so corny, like the along the journey kind of a thing, you know? But it's like, yeah, there's even in winning a championship, it's just like what? So we're just gonna go try to do the thing next year, and it's like you're not really sort of doing it for that ultimate goal, really, as much as like the yeah, honestly, the greater communal experience that it is, and hopefully that communal experience
Mm-hmm.
being connected to God Himself. But like, it's a hard thing to fight for when you're like facing the fans and the chatter and the criticisms, and you lose two
Right,
games, and
right.
everyone's like trying to burn it down and all that stuff. Yeah,
No, Boston's a really easy sports city. Like they're not a passionate fan base. They don't run their mouths after two losses at all. You know, so yeah, good luck there. Um,
yeah,
I think you kind of brought up some of these aspects, but you know, as an athlete, there's so many different sports to partake in and things like that. As a basketball player, you know, basketball's a team sport. That's its essence, and it's not just one on one on the backyard playground or anything like that. But how has the you know being an athlete, particularly in a team sport, you kind of alluded to some aspects of this, but how has that being a part of a team sport kind of helped you to grow in your faith, but also has your faith helped you to be a team athlete in that sense?
yeah. I think. I mean, honestly, I feel like a lot of the peace I found the last couple of years was kind of in submitting myself to my role in the team and just like
Mm-hmm.
knowing that yeah, I mean, it's such like a temptation, I feel like, of like kind of being like the best player when you're in high school and then college and then
Yeah.
moving forward. But I don't like the nice part about team sports and about basketball itself is like no matter how great you are, you're very much in need of the rest of your team. And you
Mm-hmm.
see, you know, all these other teams where it's like you can have incredible individual talent, but yet your ability to fit in and to make it work with the rest of your teammates and honestly for like the whole grander sense of your team, even when you're not on the court, like all those things become very real and you
Mm-hmm.
can't I mean, it's interesting because you still have the temptation to be able to say like well I'm doing my job well and everyone else
Yeah.
is kind of not holding their end of the bargain um, and I think we're pretty fortunate within our team with the Celtics of like having a group of guys that actually really hold themselves accountable and are kind of
Mm-hmm.
quickest to sort of like acknowledge what your own issues are and what you actually need to get better at before being a person to kind of point the finger to like the next guy because I mean, there's always truth in all those things, but like I've actually grown in the faith. I think in terms of understanding like the structure and authority of the church of like, all right, it's the coach's job to be able to mediate these larger issues, but it's like my individual
Mm-hmm.
job to best implement the thing that my individual coach is working on me with, and I kind of have to like submit that other people have other abilities that are greater than mine in certain areas. Yet I still have
Mm-hmm.
my important responsibilities and skills, and you kind of start seeing that really come into play of you face so many different teams, especially like in the playoffs, say, and they make they can take away one advantage, or some teams are better at taking away certain advantages, and the ability to kind of like adapt and now play to someone else's strengths, or to like
Mm-hmm.
mitigate and minimize your own weaknesses, really kind of comes up. So I think that's pertinent. Yeah, especially just in a team sport where it's like all five of you kind of have to be working on the same page
Yeah.
to be able to make it work. And as great an individual talent can be, like it's never going to be enough.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so I'm thinking, some athletes talk about a next man up kind of mentality where, regardless of where you are on the depth chart, you're ready to play each and every day. And I'm teaching a class right now about the virtue of courage, and courage really only comes in its utmost expression in the face of death. So it's like the virtue that we associate with soldiers, the virtue that we associate with martyrs. But there's this understanding that the whole of your life has to be a kind of training or discipline in anticipation of that moment, which is obviously tough to hold that together, because it would require of you a certain vigilance, right? A certain readiness, which can be hard to maintain when your nerves are taut. And so I'm thinking, in the playoffs, for instance, Kristaps Porzingis gets injured, and Al Horford, while he is an absolute monster, he's getting older. He's kind of approaching the end of his career. Like what are the I don't know, like what are the dispositions in your own life whereby you cultivate a next man up type spirit, where you're ready to contribute, come what may, and not have frayed nerves as you go to sleep each night?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like so much of that has kind of been through the experiences that like God's
Mm-hmm.
kind of placed in life where, I mean, kind of like as I was saying, like early in my career, I was like, didn't really have anything. And so you start off in positions where you're on the bench and not playing at all except for the last couple of minutes of a game, or you're like having to work out kind of around the clock and in these different hours, just like hoping and waiting kind of for that chance that you have. Um, but even now, it's like, yeah, I feel like that playoff kind of example was incredible. Where like, yeah, we had a guy who's such like a pivotal, large role of what we can do. Um, but it's like just for everyone to be ready to adapt, and I think like being united to the larger goal of just knowing like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, my job to be a good basketball player is that I help my team win. And so that's like the reality of in my situation now, what is it that I can do to actually like help my team do that, right? And it's like when you're not playing at all and you haven't played for 20 games, like that job is
Yeah.
like, and honestly, our head coach does a great job of acknowledging those guys on the team because he's like, there's going to come games where someone gets hurt or is in foul trouble, and now you're the person stepping up, and kind of all this monotonous, mundane work that you're doing without any kind of
Mm-hmm.
positive credit and feedback is going to kind of like show up in that moment. Or, yeah, you go from 10 minutes to 30 minutes because an injury happens. And I think when you just start having enough of those experiences over the years of like realizing that that's the reality, and
Mm-hmm.
also then kind of lessening your own importance when, I mean, I think it was easy for me when I had kind of the, well, it wasn't easy for me. It took a lot of years of kind of slowly letting go of my bitterness and resentment. You know how that is. But like, yeah, yeah, you just kind of learn that like, oh, this actually is what it's called to. And if I
Yeah.
really am trying to be the best I can be, then this is kind of what it means for me to be able to serve that role within the larger function of the team.
Yeah. So, as obviously a professional athlete at the highest level, and not only that, being a world champion, it's I imagine it is not that in type of environment as super competitive and the demands of that kind of lifestyle. It's not easy to kind of grow in the faith. Let's say it's not the most conducive to growing in the faith. I mean, you're not in a cloistered monastery where all you have hours upon hours a day to pray. And so maybe you can talk a little bit as much as you're comfortable with, but maybe you could talk a little bit about what your prayer life looks like when you're in a very kind of high demand career or high demand lifestyle that may not be the most conducive to growing in your relationship with the Lord. But how have you found, whether that's certain devotions or a prayer routine, or what has helped you to continue to not only engage in your faith, but grow in your faith in such a context?
Yeah, that's, I'm just saying through my first couple of years, I really didn't have any like consistent prayer life other than just like at night and then going to mass on Sundays, frankly. But then, um, essentially, as I was coming out of the NBA and all that time was, I like Exodus 90 kind of changed my mind of like actually being open to prayer life and seeing what that can actually
Mm-hmm.
look like tangibly. But in the last 2 years, especially, it's really taken to, even though our time demands are strange and our travel demands are strange, I have realized like there actually is like a lot of open time when we're on the road, and and to be able to go to, I basically gone to daily mass every game day on the road for the last 2 years, and I feel like that
Hmm.
became such like a consistent pillar that I've been called towards of like if I could make mass and it's possible, then I'm like trying to go. Because I think
Hmm.
honestly, the physical presence for me there is huge because we're traveling so much that to actually have the consistency of the liturgy is like very refreshing and reminding. And then I frankly praying the rosary is a like everyday thing for me now. That's kind of come like a lot of times when I'm traveling, it's easy to do. But like between that, the litany of Saint Joseph is like a Saint Joseph is a big
Yes.
devotion for me, especially as a father, because I think a hard
Yeah.
thing was with realizing kind of with all the travel too. I think something that Exodus helped a lot with is actually realizing like all the different poles of the emotions that I start having by actually having like quiet and space. And so by
Hmm.
limiting as much of the distraction was kind of the first thing. And that's where like taking away the social media, taking away like watching TV, frankly, that I actually became kind of a lot more aware of what was going on with myself. And then I think honestly, just becoming a father as well, it was like, oh, when I have time on the road now, and I can actually like have some freedom to do these things, whether it's yeah, mass or rosary or like even just spiritual readings and spiritual podcasts. Honestly, like I guess another big devotion is just every day. I'm at least if I'm not going to mass, I'm doing daily readings and listening to St. Paul Center has like their Letters from Home podcast, um,
Hmm.
and I think just kind of inundating yourself with more of scripture, more of like lessons in the spiritual life, and then trying to decrease, especially in our profession. Like you travel so much, you're getting in a random hours, but then also there's so much attention that's like, is there if you want to pay attention to it about thinking that your sport is so important. Um, that kind of like removing from myself, I think had to become like a very intentional thing because otherwise it'll just kind of keep churning in your head 24/7. Like I remember as a college student in my first few years, Sunday mass was basically me just like going through plays that happened in the game over and over again, and I couldn't actually like pull myself out from it. Whereas now it's
Yeah.
like, oh, I get to enjoy playing basketball, but my life is very much something away from that. Um, yeah,
You're
it's
sitting
been
on
a
the
very slow,
bench
gradual.
thinking, yeah, you're sitting on the bench thinking about which is your favorite title of Saint Joseph in the litany versus sitting in mass thinking about what your favorite play from the night before is. Is that the transition that I'm hearing right now?
Terror of Demons would be what it's actually no
Let's
joke though. Like on the bench, the amount of conversation slash things I'll think of, I realize can probably be a little bit annoying to my teammates sometimes. But like I'm absolutely like, oh, we'll go in the game and we'll do what we like are good at doing. You know, like it's what we
Yeah,
naturally
yeah,
sort of want to do. We don't need to like spend days and hours like agonizing it in our own heads. You know, like you can tell
right.
when a guy like, or when myself like, oh, I've gotten frustrated and I got very invested in this, and now I'm like gone. You know, uh,
Yeah.
and so yeah, it's nice to actually like, hey, we're living. We like doing this. We're good at this. Let's
Yeah.
go do it. Yeah.
That's I love that confidence, and that like just exudes a certain kind of like liberality, like a freedom. You're like, no, I'm confident. We prepared. We're a good team. We got cohesive. Let's just go out there and do our thing. And turns out that wins championships.
Yeah.
It does indeed. To the delight of those who support the Boston Celtics, to the chagrin of those who do not. Although, one can appreciate a good thing even from I don't know, a distance. Nevertheless, so quick thought, or
Is that?
I
I'm
suppose a
sorry.
quick
Is that
question.
distance about 5 hours by car or so?
It
Would
is.
that be
Yeah, it
It
okay?
is.
is.
It's
All right.
about 3.5 hours
Yeah.
by train.
I
Okay.
actually, for the
Okay.
Um,
record, I grew up as a Boston Celtic fan.
Oh,
There are
great.
pictures of me in my Larry Bird jersey, like a full Larry Bird outfit. I'll send them to our producers. Maybe we'll throw one up or something like that in the episode. But I am a Celtics fan through and through, so I was so happy to see that banner get raised again. The
Fascinating.
Yeah.
in the garden. So thank you
I'm
for
happy
Yeah.
for you. I suppose I'm happy for your team by extension. But I suppose it fits within the general narrative of like Philadelphia sports fandom. As great as it is to win, it's almost as great to lose because it fuels this unending woe, which is the lifeblood of the city itself. It's not insignificant that you can't tell based on the wreckage in the city whether or not the team has won or lost because it looks very similar.
Mhm.
So I think that's a testament to our irascibility and maybe to our consistency, regardless. I grew up in the suburbs, so I can't claim any of this. So I'm thinking about like you've made a lot of references to finding your place and executing your role. And that's the type of language that if it's a Sunday and I'm standing in the ambo, I mean, if it's any day of the week and I'm standing in the ambo, I'm usually using those types of words to describe the mystical body. Because I think there are a lot of people who, yeah, have difficulty consenting to and cooperating with the graces that God actually gives them because they're looking for graces that God isn't actually giving them. So it's hard to occupy the place in the body that God assigns because we fear that God isn't good, that God isn't provident, and that his graces are somehow a mistake or that we've been overlooked. I don't know. Can you maybe this will be like an opportunity to describe your little way? But it seems like Saint Therese figured this out in a really beautiful way. But it also seems like your experience of basketball has communicated to you in somewhat similar terms. I don't know. Can you speak a little bit about our place in the body?
Yeah, no, that was actually something that I was even talking to my wife like a week ago, because I think I still wrestle with it sometimes in terms of how it actually ends up playing out. And it's amazing how great I guess, like temptation to, uh, yeah, kind of like be upset that you're not the femur and that you're like the fifth metatarsal, you know? Like you're like always seeing someone else's place in it and being able to appreciate those skills. And I think a part of it too is also like I notice this when it comes to basketball, but like kind of when I talk with our coaches or other people's like, I don't think I'm aware to the things that I'm actually sort of like good at and I think are like that actually are my skills because you think it's just like natural and comes to you. Uh, and I think there's a little bit of a you see kind of it's I mean kind of like grass is always greener where you see the gifts of other people and you want those sort of gifts and you completely take for granted what your own are. Um, and it's interesting of like I mean I still sort of wrestle with it sometimes, but you do come to a point of realizing like oh, I am good at providing this thing. And I think also taking times in prayer and also like moments of gratitude. And I think even just like spending time asking God, like, what is it that are the gifts that you've given me that I get to bring?
Mhm.
Um, because I've noticed with myself, at least, there's a pretty consistent temptation to think that my gifts aren't the important ones and that the gifts that other people have are. And I think honestly, my wife was very helpful. I feel like in this, where like she can remind me of sort of what those gifts are and kind of like moments where I've you know helped her with that or with my team. But I do think that's like a pretty consistent battle. But you actually do see it. It's so much easier to see it with other guys. You know, like yeah, like I could see
Mhm.
other guys on my team are like, oh, he provides that value with this thing, and like, and you think that that guy starts having like. I don't know. There's a temptation to start seeing what all your own holes are, but then you see everyone else's sort of gifts, and um, yeah, I think it is a little bit of an act of faith, but I also think there's definitely ways to be able to cultivate that and to be able to uh, acknowledge and also know that like God made you good and God made you well and God made you exactly for the place that you're in and
Mhm.
has like a path for you to go from there. And I think, yeah, it honestly takes, I think, like the prayer a lot of times to be able to reinforce that and the time away from a lot of like the noises and the criticisms for you to actually take solace in knowing like what the truth actually is because it does feel like Satan's always trying to tempt you into thinking. I mean, I'll say especially for myself, it's like my job is a lot of times defense and finishing around the goal and setting good screens with good angles, which are actually things I'm skilled at, yet are not very glamorous. And there's a temptation to get bitter when it's like, oh no, I'm actually providing a very like good role, and I also take a lot of joy, frankly, and I feel like how I relate to people. This is honestly like a perfect role kind of for me, but you like, yeah, there's I don't know, there's so much of a temptation of wanting to be in the highest place. I think all the times, and what the world makes you think that looks like versus I think it was literally in this past week's readings, but it's like what a servant and what a leader actually looks like is to take the lowest position and to serve in those ways that like God has given you the skill to do so.
Um, you mentioned a little bit about how like it takes other people revealing to us our strengths, like, and I love that so much. And I talk to our students a lot that it's important that we kind of speak to the good that we see in each other, because the vast majority of times we don't see it in ourselves. So like being a teammate, being somebody that is able to encourage the other, helping them to see, their role, their gifts, what they, the value that they bring in, just being who they are, I think is, really, really important. I love how that you kind of like, showed that was like, actually, I started, because of my coaches, started realizing that a strength is in setting a screen with a good angle, which is a huge asset, not glamorous, but a huge asset. And I love that. I think one other question that I have, we talked a little bit about your kind of devotions and prayer life, and you mentioned spiritual reading. Give me your top 3 kind of spiritual reading books that have like really helped you when you've been on the road and in this journey, that you're like, oh my gosh, this is a classic for me. Like, what would you say are your kind of top 3 there?
So the one that's, I mean, it's a little different in terms of spiritual reading, but I think at the time of my
Sure.
life and kind of what the pastoral guidance that it gave was Fill These Hearts by Christopher West was actually one that
Mm-hmm.
was really significant for me. Honestly, well, it's interesting because this is kind of more like theological, but Brent Petre's books,
Yes.
Jesus and the Jewish Roots of the Eucharist and Jesus and the Jewish Roots of Mary and Jesus the Bridegroom. Are those like all 3, I think, of
Yeah,
his?
no, those, I love Brad Petrie. All 3 of those books
Yeah.
just rock my world. Love it so much. I'm right
Yeah,
there
no,
with you.
that was so amazing because I think honestly that got me so much more interested in the faith because I think
Yeah.
for so long I just like, it was like going to mass and you don't really realize, one, what it was, two, I think the relevance of the Old Testament and how much it like
Mhm.
prepares the way for our understanding of uh,
Yeah.
what's going on in the mass and what even Christ was doing in his life. So like those were very big theological, and I understand it's like a series of books. I'm trying to think of what one other uh, one that I did the consecration of Saint Joseph, Father Calloway.
Hmm.
So that
Yeah.
was a pretty. I mean, that was like the first time I did anything like that, which was pretty significant. And then I also think Chesterton's biographies of Aquinas and Saint Francis I
Hmm.
loved because it was, and honestly, it's a weird thing. I feel like I don't even retain a lot from what that one was, but I feel like in terms of like opening my eyes to like even an understanding of the faith and how it actually like applies in the lives of the saints, but even like in our lives, you just like realize these perspectives of people that like you didn't even know existed for like so much of your life, and they're like, oh, this is
Yep.
so much
Yep.
more beautiful and amazing, and honestly, is that thing that you've been like hoping for kind of your whole life, and that it's found within the faith. Um, yeah, I mean, Scott Hahn, I love a lot of his books because that's same with the Old Testament, New Testament type thing. But I'll
Hmm.
start with
Hmm.
that for now. Yeah.
All right. All right. Love it. Love it.
That's awesome. Um, I think that there are going to be listeners who are going to be curious as to how they formally affiliate with the Boston Celtics as fans, or how they transfer their allegiance from their present NBA teams to your NBA team. Is there an official process? Are there ways in which they can get that paperwork?
Uh, I don't think there's there maybe has to be a formal recanting before your church or
Oh.
not before your church. That seems yeah, before your maybe
Wow.
I don't think so. I think
Yeah.
you're welcome to join and kind of just tangentially, like your family members are all watching your home team, but then you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna keep track of this though too. Luckily, we're on national TV a lot, so that's an easy way to kind of sneak it. Yeah.
Good point. Yeah. Good point.
Exactly. I'm just watching the primetime game. Nothing official here. It may or may not because I'm interested in one Luke Kornet. But yeah, no, that's sweet. Thanks. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for making the time. Thanks for recording the episode. Any final word of encouragement, or final word of whatever the Lord's putting on your heart at the end of the time here for those who are listening?
I really feel like I mean the only thing I feel like I have really to share and the lesson that I've learned in my life is like the faithfulness of God and that like all that you entrust
Mhm.
over to Him uh, is not forgotten and not like received and met and answered. Even though I think I'm just always amazed about how like little my faith is in terms of like what God is actually doing and my ability to actually understand it in the time. But there's peace to be had. I think is kind of like the biggest gift, and every ounce that we don't have is kind of something for us to acknowledge and dig into and learn more about and realize how God wants to heal it. Um, yeah.
Boom. Thank you. All right, then, turning to the listener, thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Godsplaining. If you haven't yet, to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube or your podcast app, and check out godsplaining.org for upcoming events, of which there are many, and then opportunities to support and get merchandise. I think there are fun things there that are available as of late. So, yeah, know of our prayers for you. Please pray for us, and we'll look forward to chatting with you next time on Godsplaining.